Is it possible to future-proof yourself in a world that is constantly changing? A quote that I think back to often when this topic comes up is one from Alvin Toffler, where he says the illiterate of the 21st century are not those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. This week, today's guest and I are going to be discussing strategies and stories that demonstrate how, by being able to be an agile and adaptable learner, you can design a future proof career by engaging in this cycle of learning and unlearning. It's one that's sort of unfamiliar to many of us who have been told that if we just memorize certain facts, if we just learn certain things, then we'll be set for the rest of our lives. And that just isn't the case anymore. The past few weeks have really seemed like an eternity, where in the blink of an eye, everything changed for us overnight. We had always talked about the world changing, and we knew and were experiencing many of those changes. We'd heard of the fourth industrial revolution that was upon us, yet none of us could have really anticipated what we are currently confronted with. None of us expected the changes that were going to come or that were emerging to unfold as quickly as they have and to have disrupted as much as they have. I've talked often about what a profound impact the last recession in 2008 had on me as a new graduate in the teaching profession. I think one of these days I'll save that whole story for a solo episode because the lessons I learned during that time are so relevant to what I feel so many could learn and implement with what we're going through today. But really the highlight that I want to share with you today is that unlike previous economic downturns, there were no social media platforms that allowed us to connect and learn with anyone, anytime, anywhere. And that's really a game changer because for me and so many other people, our social media networks are really what have allowed us to thrive in our ability to learn and unlearn and really future-proof ourselves and be prepared for the changes that the world is going to continue to bring. Things like podcasts and just watching people's Instagram stories or Facebook Lives didn't exist back then. Blogs and YouTube were so in the early stages that they just really weren't at the capacity that they are today with the types of information that we have available to us. For me personally, understanding the world around me and how it was changing, and then reflecting upon my own strengths and values, ultimately allowed me to design my own learning journey, which really allowed me to take control of my professional journey as well. After my last teaching job where I got a pink slip, I realized that I couldn't constantly be relying on other jobs, that I had to create my own by using a method that I learned from Seth Godin. Now, if you follow me, you know that I am an avid Seth Godin reader, and that's really because his books, especially Linchpin, just had a profound impact on my ability to make that transition. Now, there's a lot of advice that I love from Seth Godin, but the one that really changed the game for me was when he asked the question, what makes you indispensable? What are your strengths? What are your values? What is it that you bring to the table? And make no mistake, we all bring something to the table that is going to make you indispensable to those around you. Once you're able to identify that and you keep learning, you naturally begin to adapt with the world as it changes. So that when all of a sudden something like a pandemic happens, yes, your life is definitely disrupted, but not to the degree as someone who wasn't prepared. To discuss this topic with me in more detail, it's with great enthusiasm that I introduce you to this week's guest, Keith Keiting, a workforce futurist who studies changes and trends in the workforce and how we can best prepare people so that they can future-proof themselves. Keith has a career that spanned over 20 years in learning and development. He holds a master's degree in leadership and is currently pursuing his doctorate in the Chief Learning Officer program at the University of Pennsylvania. Keith has experience in a myriad of areas, ranging from performance improvement, instructional design, leadership coaching, operations management, and process transformation. But more recently, Keith has been leading clients on the design and execution of their global learning strategies. I'm so excited for you to all join me in this conversation this week with Keith Keiting.
How
How do you navigate change? It's a question we think about often, and one that today's world expects us to be comfortable with. The challenge, however, is where do you begin, and how do you develop the mindset and skill set to be successful? Welcome, everyone, to the Sprint to Success with Design Thinking podcast. I'm your host, Saba Kidwai. Join me each week as I share the stories and strategies from the world's leading researchers and practitioners about why they believe the answer lies in practicing design thinking. Hello, Keith, and welcome to Sprint to Success. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. It's really great to be here. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Oh my gosh, given everything that is happening in the world today, so am I, because I think a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today are things that people have been talking about for a while, but I think a lot of people are going to be, I think it's going to resonate on a deeper level with a lot of our listeners, given the current crisis that's going on. So, you call yourself a workforce futurist. Tell us a little bit about what that means and a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So it's a little bit of a buzzword. I'm happy to call that out and call myself out for that. But I think it's an important buzzword. So for me, and I think it means different things to different people. So for me, what I do is I study trends and industry changes in our workforce, looking at the demographics, looking at the political, looking at the economy to figure out what ways is our work going to be transforming in the near future and in the long-term future. But my passion really is not only identifying the change that's going to be coming, but for me, more importantly, I think it's preparing our workforce for that change, for tomorrow, so that they're able to really future-proof themselves and be aware of what's changing so that they can adapt.
So I love that. And one of the things that I think is so fascinating, which is why this conversation is probably going to be top of mind for everyone, is every single time we talked about the workforce changing and preparing for that change, nothing could have prepared us for what we're currently going through in this moment, which is really why, and which is really the preparation we had been trying to get through to people, I mean, trying to give people. What are some of the things that you're seeing happening right now, some of the changes you're seeing right now that people are having to adapt to?
We know what's I'm trying to look at the positive side of what we're going through. There's so much loss. There's so much heartache. There's so much loss overall. But I think for me, I'm trying to look at the positive side. And so the positive side is that this has catapulted, this has accelerated our workforce transformation. I'm just going to throw out a number: 10 years into a matter of weeks. What I love about what we're going through is I have been talking, and we in general have been talking about working remote. We know that work is not where you go; it's what you do. So where I'm sitting should have no impact on my job. And we've been talking about and advocating it, and it's been slow to adoption. It's estimated that about 25 to 30% of the workforce are remote workers. Overnight, it's almost like the entire world has moved to remote working. And so 6 months ago, if I would have had a conversation with an organization and said, hey, here's where we think we're going, here's what we need to do, we would have heard this. IT needs to approve it. We need to have business continuity set up. We need to make sure our infrastructure is approved. We've got a change management plan. They would have come up with 100 reasons why it wouldn't work or why it would take X number of years for it to actually be implemented. But we did it and we're doing it. And it may not be easy, it may not be perfect, it's clunky right now, but businesses are that do have the luxury to be remote are thriving, and some are even growing more with this new world that we're living in right now. And so that's, we think about the changes that we've been talking about. The work remote is one of them. And I think another one where we're seeing that we've been talking about is the mental health aspect and the importance, especially in North America, of having the ability to say, I'm not okay. I have anxiety. I have depression. I need help. I need support. Is it, at least in my opinion, has not been very welcoming. It's not an open dialogue, but I feel that now we're starting to have that dialogue because we are in a situation where we have never been through this before. We are in a global collective disaster. And when we think back to, our life, we lived through Katrina, we lived through 9/11, but those were um, really segregated to some portions of the world. Although we all felt it, we weren't necessarily experiencing it together at the exact same time. But that's what we're going through now. So, in some ways, this is also uniting us. This is really allowing us to create a truly networked world. So I know that's a lot. So I'm going to pause for a minute.
No, I love that. And one of the things that there's two things there's a lot of things that you brought up, but one thing I think that ties them all together is the purpose and the reasoning really for why design thinking. And there's two things in particular that you brought up. Number one, you said, we all just kind of had a little bit of time to put something together. That before, if we had tried to do this, it would have taken weeks and weeks and so much approval and so much planning and thinking. But one of the things that we know about why design thinking can be so valuable is the idea of a quick prototype: fail fast, fail forward. And it's almost as if we were all forced into developing our own prototypes. And the second big thing that you mentioned is this idea of mental health and how this situation is so different for so many different people. And it's one of the other reasons why just I feel like I in particular am so passionate about design thinking is it really allows individuals, local communities to think about what impact is this having on me as an individual? What impact is this having on me as a community member? What impact is this having, on us as a country? And how do we solve for that? Because we are seeing just from community to community, just workplace to workplace, everybody is coming up with something a little bit different, and everyone's needs are a little bit different. So can you tell us a little bit about why you in particular find design thinking to be valuable and how you think it can help people at a time like this?
Great question. Um, so for me, design thinking is a perfect solution for creative problem solving. And I was introduced to it several years ago. I consider myself a problem solver. I love looking for opportunities where I can make something a little bit better. And so when I was introduced to design thinking, it was such an aha moment of here is a methodology that anybody can apply. It's a methodology that asks us to take a step back from the problem that we're facing and think about who we are solving that problem for. And it's such a beautiful time now to be advocating for design thinking because design thinking is all based around that end user, that human on the other end of the problem. And it encompasses and embraces empathy. And empathy is such an important characteristic for us to be exhibiting right now. In fact, I was just saying to someone earlier today, CEO should now stand for Chief Empathy Officer because we need now more than ever our leaders, whether it be government, whether it be private, public, educational, we need them to be empathetic and to acknowledge what we're going through, especially from a CEO perspective. Because without your workers, without your workforce, your company does not exist. And we need the CEOs and we need leadership to recognize that we've got to be talking about our employees, talking about the workforce, talking about what we're going through from a human standpoint. In fact, the other day, I was talking with Elliot Mazie, and we were on a call and we were thinking about what's one word that would describe empathy. And so we created a word cloud based on it. And I'm just looking at the picture right now, and it warms me up to see these are some of the most repetitive phrases that were used or single words: listening, caring, connection, humility, humanity, authenticity, understanding. And I think listening is probably one of the most important um, adjectives or characteristics I would describe of what we need to be doing for empathy right now. Because as you said, each one of us have a different experience for what we're going through. So we are all collectively, globally going through this together. but not every one of us has the exact same experience. I don't have children. I don't have any pets. So I'm able to use this time differently than the majority of the people who are out there that might have multiple kids at home, spouses, siblings, just a lot of chaos in their home. We've got to be aware of all the different type of situations that each of us are in. So going back to your question, why is design thinking valuable for us, especially right now more than ever? It's because it starts with empathy. It starts with thinking about the human on the other end of that problem that we're solving for. And to your point, it allows us to rapidly prototype. And that's what we're doing right now, which is, again, such a beautiful outcome of the situation that we're in, is that there is no rule book. There is no previous situation where we can go back and say, this is what you should be doing. This is how you should be feeling. This is what you should be doing to get through this. None of that exists. So we are all in this together. We're all trying to navigate to figure out, how do we survive? How do we work in this new world that we're in now while not losing that humanity, and making sure that we're being empathetic with each other, with coworkers, with our neighbors, and in many ways, I think that we are. You see a lot of that globally. I love one of my specific things that I can do is I start every meeting with, how are you? You individually, not how is your team, not how is your work going, but I want to know how you are today. And on some calls, I'll use a scale of 1 to 10. And I'll just ask, either put in the chat window or say to me, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 means I want to get off this call right now because I just don't have the energy to talk to you. And 10 is, I'm feeling great and I'm excited and I'm energized. Tell me how you are today. And based on how they respond, look, if we've got people that are at a 2 or 3, feel free to jump off the call. This is not the priority right now. Your family is the priority. You are the priority. And really just surviving each day is our priority.
Absolutely. I love that. And you know what it reminds me of? And I remember this was such a big shift for me in really thinking about how the words we use matter. Was Sheryl Sandberg in Lean In actually talked about how, after the death of her husband, one of the things that she hated the most was when people used to just ask her, "How are you?" And what
Hmm.
she really wanted was for people to say, "How are you today?" And it's just
Hmm.
incredible how the difference of adding just one word completely changes how you come across, or just how your communication is impacting and influencing somebody else, in terms of allowing them to open up and just kind of go over all of those different things that you talked about. And so, thank you. That was a really nice overview of why design thinking, that I think is going to lead us really nicely into kind of transitioning a little bit into talking about how you used it, because you have. So one of the things shared was how at General Motors you guys use the design thinking process to help you answer, how might we best support our learners in their professional development. And you've done a lot of work around this. I think a lot of people were really torn between what is effective, professional development for people in organizations. How do we help people move forward so they are prepared to adapt? It's like a lot of situations you're never really prepared for what it is that people are trying to prepare you for. But tell us a little bit about what you guys did at GM, and why you chose design thinking, and just what some of the outcomes were for you in thinking about transitioning your workforce towards, the future.
Absolutely. So when I joined the team about 4 years ago, one of my first questions to them was, "How are we doing?" And the answer was, we're doing great. Our level 1 surveys are all very good. Our feedback from our learners is great. We're doing great. Okay, good, great. Everything sounds great. My next question was, could we be better? And a question that I think all of us can ask, regardless of your organization, your industry, your role, could we be better? And one of my favorite use cases for design thinking is continuous improvement. And again, it's a question I think all of us can ask. And so when I did ask, the initial response was not necessarily well received, which is not uncommon. When I work with clients and they say, "Yeah, we're doing great, everything's great, we're going to keep going status quo," and I challenge that and say, "Well, could we be even better?" The response is, "Well, we're already doing great." Right, but could we be better? And so through the conversation, it really consisted of, look, if we start a design thinking initiative on identifying and uncovering and finding ways to help our learners, Worst case scenario, we validate what we already know. We validate that everything is great and they don't need anything else. That's worst case scenario. Best case scenario, we uncover that they do actually need something else and we can help drive performance improvement, performance support, and at the end of the day, be able to sell more vehicles. It's a win win for the organization. So when you position it that way, there really is no bad reason, no reason not to use design thinking for continuous improvement. And so, with that in mind, we began our initiative. And long story short, is that we did, first of all, validate that they were correct. All the data that they had demonstrated that yes, everything was good. Learners were happy. But sometimes it's in how you ask the question or in the questions that we're not asking. So we were focused on the learning that they were receiving. Did you like it? Is it impactful? Is it valuable? Et cetera, et cetera. And the answer was yes to all of that. We weren't asking the questions, is there something else that you need? And really focusing on some specific examples to draw those other potential needs out of them. And so through the design thinking initiative, yes, we validated that what they were receiving, they did love, they do love the trainers, they do love the training. But more importantly, we did uncover something extremely vital. And that is that they did need something else. They did need more training, different training, something that we weren't even focused on. So our team is focused on um, product training as related to the vehicles. We weren't focused on soft skills, or preferably what I like to use as power skills. And those power skills, we assumed they were receiving from someone else, preferably the dealerships or maybe their managers. And so there was this huge disconnect because the dealerships thought that we were already delivering that training. And so we uncovered that what they needed help with was selling skills, listening skills, communication skills, being able to establish themselves as a business. And so that was a huge win for us to uncover that through the design thinking empathy research that we did.
Can I pause you there for a second? Because I want to really just have you emphasize again what power skills mean to you. Because I feel like even though you are talking about a very specific industry, it's really industries across the board that are now
Mhm.
demanding these skills, and something really for new graduates to be thinking about as well. So, can you just really quickly recap for us what those power skills are and then continue your story?
Absolutely. So, power skills, otherwise known as soft skills, and I refer to them almost sometimes as our human skills. So that could be communication, it could be project management, it could be listening, it could be empathy, it could be negotiation skills. So, gosh, it's one of those things where I kind of know it in my mind, but it's sometimes hard to explain uh, what's in my mind. So, and the reason that I refer to them as power skills, which I think that you're going to see a transition of the verbiage to that, is because power skills or soft skills are such an important part of our future. When we think about the workforce of the future, um, our power skills are what set us apart from artificial intelligence, from robotics, and from technology. And so it's also could be our higher order cognitive skills. So that is empathy, our problem solving, listening, our creativity, our logic, our emotions. Being able to tap into those higher order cognitive skills are what is going to help us future proof when we think about an age of artificial intelligence versus our own.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for that. That was a really fantastic overview. And I think it's just a great way for people to help take a lot of these buzzwords that they hear, but really think about it in a more tangible way. So thank you for that. So tell us a little bit about once you guys had discovered that at GM and that you had discovered that gap existing. And that's, again, one of the other things I want to touch on really quickly about why design thinking can be so valuable is because on the surface, it can seem like everything's okay. But if you really do want to help prepare and upskill yourself for, these complex challenges or just these unknown scenarios that we're going to see as we become more of a connected and global world. Are those gaps that come up like, wow, we had no idea that this little piece was missing because maybe we thought somebody else was covering it, or maybe we just didn't even realize how relevant it might be for us. What are some of the outcomes you saw once that need was identified and you guys were able to help solve for that?
We immediately started to react to this. So there's a couple of things I'll preface this with. Many people might be familiar with Agile as a problem-solving methodology, or Lean Six Sigma, or PDCA. And so one of the questions I always get is, well, how is design thinking different from one of those? And if my group or I prefer Agile, can I just continue using that? And I would say the difference, the best way to understand is that if you already know what the problem is, and you already know how to go about solving that problem, design thinking may not be the right tool for you to be using. But if you aren't sure if a problem exists, if you aren't sure what the problem is, if there's not alignment with your team on what the problem is, if you're looking for a new creative way to solve a problem, or you're looking, as I've already mentioned, for continuous improvement, design thinking may be a good tool for you. So once we identified through the empathy research that there was a bit of a gap among assumptions in who was responsible for the training, we then continued through the design thinking initiative um, with looking to rapidly prototype. Well, first of all, we got together to identify what are some potential solutions through our brainstorming methodology. Then once we came up with those ideas, we had some quick prototypes, and then we went out and started testing those ideas within the dealerships. And what I would say is, one quick example I would share, um, in learning and development, and I think not just in organizations, but in both higher education and organizations, we're going to see a shift from us being content creators to being content curators. And what that means is there's a lot of training that already exists. There's a lot of knowledge that's out there. And we're going to be continuing to move away from this idea we need to create something rather than tapping in to experts that may already be out there, tapping into already created materials and then localizing it or just transitioning it to what we need. And so one of the great outcomes that we ended up with was we recognize that there are sales consultants that are experts in these power skills. So why are we, the Learn and Development Group, trying to create this ourselves? Why don't we create an environment? Why don't we create a social environment so that new hires can tap into those needs? And so we just created a private Facebook page in one of our prototype sessions. And it's actually been very successful. So we have over 2,500 users in that. We've got people who have reported that they've been able to sell vehicles based on information that they're learning from within that Facebook group. And it's a community where they can learn and grow from each other, and where we can just moderate and help where needed, but allowing them to tap into that subject matter expertise.
I really like that. It actually reminds me, one of the things, one of my favorite quotes is from Alvin Toffler, where he says, "The illiterate of the 21st century are not those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn,
Learn,
and relearn."
unlearn, and relearn.
Right? And I think, it's just
Absolutely.
yeah, it's just one of the things that you may come into an industry thinking that this is your skill set, or you graduate thinking, okay, this is what I need to do and I've been trained. But as we've seen, it can change where you have to adapt within, 24 to 48 hours sometimes, as we've all just experienced. So tell me a little bit about tell me a little bit about adaptive learning, what some of the qualities are, and why this is an important skill for today.
Mm. I would even, so let me start by talking about lifelong learners and lifelong learning. And this is a concept that I am encouraging everyone to adopt, not just our workforce, but your home life as well. I talk with my parents about it. I talk with my cousins, with my siblings. Everyone right now needs to be a lifelong learner. So the concept of being a learner has shifted. I would say 2 generations and beyond before us, the concept was more like you go to school and you learn a trade, you learn a skill, and then you do it, and then you retire. That no longer exists. In order for us to be agile and adaptable, we need to learn, unlearn, and relearn, just like you talked about, just like Mr. Toffler talked about many years ago. That learn, unlearn, and relearn, that is the cycle of a lifelong learner. And the reality is, our modern careers are like nonstop conveyor belts. You've got to keep moving and learning no matter what stage that you're in. It's when we're content with our learning, that mindset puts us at risk. And so, having that concept of being a lifelong learner is going to help us, help our workforce be agile, adaptable, and ready to fill the next organizational gap. And that's an important distinction, the next organizational gap, because as you just talked about, as we're seeing right now, we've got needs that we could not have planned for. We are pivoting, we are experiencing agility like we've never seen before. And in some ways, it is so beautiful. We've got multi billion-dollar organizations that have completely pivoted their business model. We've got fast food chains who are now in the school delivery lunch program for children who are no longer going to school, but they're helping to deliver their lunches. We've got automotive manufacturers that have stopped producing cars and they're now producing ventilators and safety gear. We've got beer manufacturers that are now creating hand sanitizer. It's just beautiful, their ability to adapt and pivot on it with such little notice. I mean, literally in a matter of days. And so it's important for us as the workforce, as humans, to have that lifelong learner mentality so that we can be ready to fill that next organizational gap. And I say that because when we talk about the workforce of the future, the futurists, will come up with a lot of information. We'll come up with ideas and thoughts about what it's going to look like. The truth is, none of us know. The future is not yet written. We have the opportunity to create what that future looks like. And the best skill set that we can, the best power skill that's going to help us future proof our work and what we're focusing on is being agile and adaptable so that whatever happens within the organization, you can be a linchpin. You can be one of those individuals that can meet whatever those needs are. To do that, we've got to be agile, adaptable, and to help you build that skill, you've got to be a lifelong learner.
I love that. I absolutely agree. It was funny. I remember, there's so much conversation these days about like, is it too soon to talk about these things? Should I just sit quietly? And, one of the things I'm a really big advocate for is just carry on with those messages, carry on with the educating, because I remember when I went through the 2008 recession, just feels, it obviously wasn't even on this scale or this magnitude, but I remember losing my job. I remember getting a layoff notice. I remember just experiencing the world is changing. Somebody help me. And so I think back to when I was in that situation, I wanted to know as quickly as possible what I needed to do to adapt. I did not want to be sitting there wallowing away or having, just people be like, oh, no, let her adjust. It's too soon. It is never too soon to help somebody pivot and make the changes they need so that they can be successful. And Lynchpin by Seth Godin was actually the book that I read that really helped me take the steps that I needed to think about just how the world was different because school had not prepared me at all. And that book and Seth Godin's advice really, really, really helped me pivot and become successful to where now that these changes are taking place because of the changes that I had made in my career or just the way in which I thought about my career trajectory, allowed me now to be able to weather this storm. So I definitely agree with everything you said. And I think it's just so, so, so helpful. So, what
Um,
are some of the qualities then that you see of a lifelong learner, of an adaptive learner, so that people can think about, yes, I have this one, or oh my God, that's something maybe I should become better at? What are some of those skills that you highlight?
Hmm. Good question. So, first of all, I definitely would recommend reading Lynchpin. I agree with you. It's a phenomenal book. It's actually on my coffee table downstairs. I'm rereading it right now. And I think that the first is curious. Be curious. Always be asking questions. Always look at what's changing around you and try to understand it. Don't just accept what you're being told, whether it be in higher education, whether it be in organizations, that whatever is said is the truth. Question it and research it and make your own opinions. Be your own advocate, be your own thinker. The truth is, and some might think this is a controversial statement, but none of us are safe in our jobs. And I think everyone, it might be less controversial now with what we're currently going through, but it's a mindset that I adopted around the same time as you with the first recession, with being laid off. And I remember thinking, you know what? The generational difference is, as I mentioned earlier, I believe that our parents' generation, um, they were of that mindset. You learn something, you be safe with the job, you just go in and you do what you're told, and you'll be okay. Don't think, don't ask questions, don't buck the system, and you'll have your job and you can retire with your pension. Well, pensions don't exist anymore.
Mhm.
That mindset doesn't exist. And we're not safe with that mindset. And so you have to be your own advocate. You have to represent yourself. And you've got to constantly be challenging, curious, ask questions, research. And I would say give yourself what I call stretch assignments. Um, do something, keep that gray brain matter just evolving in your mind. I like to give myself a stretch assignment every couple of months. In fact, I started back at university. I'm getting my doctorate from University of Pennsylvania in the Chief Learning Officer program. And that was mainly because I wanted to see, can I do this? Can I challenge myself? And so I would say the best recommendation I can give is be curious, ask questions, research, and create stretch assignments in areas that you're not experienced in areas that can just help you continue to grow and set yourself apart from everyone else. Become that linchpin.
Absolutely. I love that. And so, speaking of your doctoral program, tell us a little bit about why you chose to go and a little bit about your research area of interest.
I would say that that first of all, it was never in my plan. I never wanted to go back to school. Never thought that I never would see myself as a doctor, a doctor of education. It just wasn't me, it wasn't in my plan. And someone else in my company had started the program about 3 years ago. And he said immediately, I think this is for you. I think you could benefit. And I wasn't interested. I wasn't in the right mindset. And it wasn't in my cards. And he spent about 3 years saying, you've got to believe in yourself. You have to challenge yourself. You have to grow. Um, you've got to find something to set yourself apart. And so finally, I thought, I'm just going to apply, and I'm not good enough anyway, so I'm going to get rejected. But then I can just get him off my back to say, at least I tried. And I applied, and I remember receiving that acceptance letter. It's probably one of the biggest highlights of my life. I cried, and I would tell you, I didn't think I cared until I got that letter. And since then, it's been a very interesting journey to go back into academia. I've been in the learning and development profession for over 20 years, so I am an educator, but I'm a corporate educator, and so it's different now being in academia and seeing that there is such a difference in the way that academia approaches adult education versus the way organizations approach adult education. And so, to be quite honest, I struggle a little bit with creating a bridge between the two and figuring out how much I need to try and push the academia side to get it better aligned to the corporate education, because there's a bit of a gap there, and I think it goes to a bigger discussion around higher education and how much it actually prepares you for the organizational work.
So, what advice would you give to people? Because I think you're absolutely correct. And what you're saying doesn't just apply, say, to a doctoral program, it applies
Mhm.
to, say, all the undergraduates that are at home on Zoom meetings right now as well. So, what advice would you give to those students who are currently in that situation? Some of them may be aware and cognizant the way you are about the gap that they're experiencing, some may not even have a clue. So, what would you say to those students?
I preface that this is probably a little bit of a controversial statement, but um, as someone who works in organizations, as someone who's in charge of hiring people, your work experience, your skill set, for me, is more important than your academia education. I and I think it's less controversial to say that now, because there's a lot of big organizations that are finally shifting away from that. They're finally saying that master's degrees aren't a requirement anymore. In fact, some are even saying that degrees in general are not a requirement, and it is very controversial. It is a shift, and I struggle myself because I'm currently paying a lot of money to go to a higher education program where, at the core of me, I know that I would still hire people without a university degree. So I think my answer is, I don't want to dissuade anybody to not pursue education. I think education is critical, but there are so many different ways that you can get education now. edx.org is phenomenal. That's just one type of MOOC, massive open online course. And there's so many free programs on there that are from MIT, Harvard, Yale, top schools. And I feel like we're gonna see more um, development in that area, because when you create those type of MOOCs, they are, I think, more relevant with what we're going through in the current time, day and age. And so I think that is an opportunity that exists that people should be looking into. It helps you get that critical, quick skill set versus needing to go and get a 4-year degree. When you leave that degree or that education system, the question is, has it prepared you for the real world and working in organizations? And in my opinion, that is a gap right now within higher education systems, that there is a huge divide between academia and organizations. And so internships are important. Certifications, I think, to me, are more important than your degree or what school you went to.
Absolutely. And I really like how you kind of lay out all of those different options. I'm in the same boat as you. I'm also in a doctoral program. And I feel like education can be so valuable, but you really have to know what it is you're hoping to get out for it and almost like co design the experience.
Mhm.
I just don't think universities are in a place right now where they have thought enough about how to provide people with sort of like more of a relevant education experience, but you can absolutely complement what a lot of traditional institutions give you by kind of designing, again, just your own space. So that's kind of taking a look at a bit of, the new graduate demographic. I want to kind of wrap up by talking a little bit about people that maybe, are well established in their professions and are experiencing a little bit of, discomfort with, wow, like I was doing so well until dot, dot, dot. And I know you talk a lot about how you can identify these transferable skills. So they don't always have to be things that are brand new. They are things that maybe you have, or, maybe a lot of the ones like curiosity, for example, and creativity we had when we were younger, and it's almost like they're taken away. How might people be able to bring them back? And how can people even go about identifying what some of their transferable skills might be?
So the first I would say is another, just to help people understand what we mean by transferable skills. They're also those portable skills. And what that means is these are the skills that follow you wherever you go, regardless of the industry that you work in, the organization, your job title. These are your skill sets. And I'll give you an example. When I introduce myself to people, I don't use my functional job title. That is an HR title that means something to my organization, and it could mean something to the industry, but it tells you nothing about what I do. My job title is Senior Director of Global Learning Strategies. It's fancy, like it on my digital business card, but it doesn't tell you anything. What I am is a problem solver. And that skill set, that transferable skill will follow me wherever I go. I love problems. I love problem solving. I love the methodologies around them. I like looking for ways to make something better, whether it be a situation, a product, a service. And so that applies to any company, any job, anywhere. So the I'm in a very unique situation because I don't worry about the future of my job because I know that when I lose my job, if I lose my job, that having that skill set is needed in many other organizations. And so I'll be able to find something else. And so that's an example of a transferable skill. Some other transferable skills are having awareness of strategies, how to write strategies, how to think strategically, team management, and leadership. Leadership skill is a great transferable skill that's highly needed in many organizations around the world. Data analytics, communication, time management, strong work ethics, commercial awareness. These are all and they sound very generic, and they are, and that's the intention of it, generic by design. But these are skills that transfer wherever you go, regardless of your job title. And I'll share, very early on in my career, I recognized the concept of transferable skills. I was working in a fast food industry and I wanted to move out of that. And I didn't know necessarily how to do that. And so at this time, this was back when newspapers still printed job ads, and Sunday was the best day to look for the jobs. And I found this posting for a Microsoft Office trainer. And I had no idea what this actually meant, but I knew Microsoft Office very well. I had used it in school, and I liked acting. And so I thought, well, if I'm a trainer, then I get to kind of have a stage that I can be on. So maybe I can do this. And so I remember looking at the job ad, and the skills needed were Microsoft Office, were communication skills, presentation skills, all things that I knew how to do. So even though I may not have had a job with the title Microsoft Office Trainer, I still had the skill sets. I still found the ways to transfer what it is that they were looking for into what I already had experience doing, and ended up applying for the job, and I got it. And then a few years later, when I wanted to transition to something else, there was a job that had always interested me called a change management specialist. And I loved that fancy job title, but I'd never had that before. And so I did the exact same thing. I looked at the skills that were required. I looked at my history and the skills that I had, and I found transferable experiences that would meet the needs of what it is that they were looking for. And so I share that as an example, as a way for the listeners, when you're worried about the future of your job, you're worried about what jobs are available out there, and what if I don't have that same job title? Forget about the job title. What you should be focusing on are the skills necessary within that job and how you have skills that may match. Look for the story that you've experienced and how you're an expert in that area so that you can illustrate that in your cover letter or in your CV or in the discussion with the individual about that job, because that's much more important than the job title itself. We're going to see a shift away from these functional job titles. And we're starting to see that a little bit now, but I think it's going to continue. So, moral of the story is identify the transferable skills that you have when you're looking for jobs, don't focus on the job title and whether or not you have that experience. Focus on what it is they're looking for and how your experience matches those needs.
I absolutely love that and couldn't agree more. And I think one of the beauties of today is people have so many different mediums and platforms where they can share their talents, their skills, their work. So it's not just something that's written on a piece of paper like everybody else. It's something you can really
Mhm.
demonstrate your ability in. Oh my God, Keith, thank you so much for this incredible conversation today. Anything that you'd like to share with the audience that I haven't asked you that you think is important for people to know?
Gosh, we have covered so much.
We did. I always like to give people that opportunity because it's just, there's so many things out there and, you can't know everything, but I just always kind of like to give people that opportunity.
I think I would just recap and just really illustrate the importance of being a lifelong learner. Be curious, be your own advocate. No one is going to help support you as much as you are going to help support yourself. Read Lynchpin. I
Mhm.
will tell you, there's a chapter in Lynchpin that I reread over the weekend, and he was talking about how to separate yourself from the rest of the workforce. And one example he gives is if you need if you are relying only on a CV or a resume to demonstrate your capabilities, you've already lost. Because the way the system is set up, especially right now, one of the challenges that we're seeing um, with LinkedIn and applying to jobs is that they're starting to use a bit of AI or machine learning, and there's bias in there. And so if you don't have the right keywords, your information is not going to show up. Well, something that somebody said to me recently was, he told me, "You're not employable." And he wasn't saying that I don't have skills or that I'm not going to be able to find the job. He's basically telling me that I'm not that typical cookie cutter person that's going to be a square peg in a square hole and do what is necessary to get the job done, because I like to solve problems. I like to be curious and challenge, and a lot of organizations don't like to be challenged. And so taking that idea that, I'm not employable, and thinking about what Seth had said, that you've got to set yourself apart and not be so dependent on the CV. Because if you are just being dependent on the CV, you may have already lost. And so his example was Google yourself. And what comes up with when you Google yourself? And so I did that over the weekend, and it wasn't really much. And so now I'm actually spending a significant amount of time to create a website so that I can create examples of projects, examples of how I have these power skills and the way that I've used them before, so that I've got a physical place or a way to help exhibit myself so that I can be employable in the future. So I share that to say, be your own advocate, find ways to set yourself apart from the other workforce, because we're going to have an influx of people who are out of jobs. What separates you from them? Identify your transferable skills, and create a tool, not just a resume, but something else. It could be a website, it could be a project, it could be a portfolio, but something that you can share that really demonstrates who you are and the value that you can bring, because we all have value to be bring. We've just got to find the right way to be demonstrating that.
I love that. That is such a beautiful ending. And what a great project to inspire other people to think about in terms of how they might be able to create that for themselves. Keith, if people want to learn more from you, where can they find you?
LinkedIn is the best place. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I don't think there's many Keith Keatings out there, so you can just put me in search, Keith Keiting, and I would love to continue conversations there. I post a lot, engage a lot. It's a great platform to connect and to share best practices.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing everything you did. Stay safe, stay healthy, and look forward to speaking to you soon.
Absolutely. Same to you. Thank you.
It's your turn to join the conversation by sharing what you enjoyed or what questions you still have. In a world where time and attention are so valuable, thank you for choosing to listen and for being a part of our Sprint to Success with Design Thinking community.